Have you ever looked to a game for comfort? Maybe it was to remind you of a simpler time as a child. Maybe you had a bad day and you want to warp into a new world in which you take control and get lost in. Has a game ever positively impacted you in any way, shape or form? Video games are fun. Some people play them purely for that reason. Some people play them because they're competitive and want to get great at one game and become pro, or maybe try and beat a world record speedrun. Some use it as a therapy, a way to take a break and relieve some stress. Pick up a controller or sit at a desk and just put their brain into do not disturb mode and let the game take them away. This is the first part to a 3-part series where I'm going to cover topics within the game industry and explain how they help the player. So please join me as you watch Game Therapy, the power of nostalgia, comfort and escapism in video games. That right there is nostalgia. If you heard that noise and instantly felt some warmth or joy of a happier time, then you just felt nostalgia. Maybe you're older or younger and never had the joy of the PS2, or maybe you just played another platform. Either way, whatever you're thinking of now brings to you the emotion of sentimental yearning for a past time. Nostalgia is just that. It's the past and our brain's neurons firing up and creating a link between an external stimuli or an internal emotion and a memory. It's the feeling of a wistful or excessively sentimental yearning for return to or of some past period or irrecoverable condition. Simply put, it's the feeling of wanting to relive a moment from the past, and the feeling is caused by a trigger of that memory. The triggers may be external, and these tend to be things like smells, objects from one's childhood, the taste of something, music, and so on. When you think of nostalgia, it's often looked at as a positive feeling, or at the very least a look back at a more positive time, but nostalgia is also spawned from the emotions we feel, and often from negative ones. This is the internal cause of nostalgia. Feeling sad or lonely, possibly a fear of some kind, they can all trigger a link in our brain and bring on the sometimes overwhelming feeling of a better time, a person or an instance, almost like a self-defense mechanism brought on to stop ourselves from becoming even more sad, lonely or fearful. It's this power of nostalgia that fascinates me. No matter if it's to do with a feeling or a stimuli like hearing the startup of the PlayStation 2, everyone has experienced the sensation of reminiscing about a better time. I chose to open this with the PS2 sound not only because it's a classic noise, but because I find a lot of comfort in it. The second generation of the PlayStation is where I found myself a lot of the time as a child. I grew up playing the hell out of that system. I was on the PS1 for a little while, but I got a PS2 because my cousins got the PS3 when it came out, and I got it gifted with a couple of games, including WWE SmackDown and a Lord of the Rings movie game that I never played because it was way too hard. I'd run in the house from school and boot up Crash Bandicoot and play the game for the 400th time. As a kid, it didn't matter about what game I was playing, it could be the worst game ever, and even still, it was the greatest thing in the world to me. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Rayman, Ratchet & Clank, Transformers the movie game, just to name a few games that I spent hours upon hours in and loved. I remember playing Ratchet & Clank 3, and at some point in the game, after completing a mission and making it back to the ship to set off, I'd get stuck in an infinite loading screen, watching Ratchet fly across the screen over and over, just waiting. It was probably just that the disc was damaged, but I'd leave that sitting there for hours, hoping I would eventually get to play the next level. Now, as an adult, I can replay these games and understand issues that I was running into, and I can resolve them and play the parts my younger self yearned to play so bad. One of the reasons I started this channel was purely for the sake of nostalgia. I wanted to play games I loved as a kid, as well as others that I didn't get the chance to play but really wanted to. Now I can do that, and that inner kid that's still in me gets to play it, and a part of me feels reconnected to myself. Playing certain games may be enough to cause nostalgia, but it's not going to be the same for everyone. After all, not everyone has the same past. Some games alone are enough to generate that feeling of linking the past and present and create nostalgia. For some, it may be sitting down with friends or family and playing couch co-op. From the 2023 Power of Play study by the Entertainment Software Association, it found that 71% of participants felt less stressed when playing video games. 61% stated it reduced anxiety, and 58% said it made them feel less lonely or isolated. Nick Bowman, who writes papers on the cognitive, emotional, social and physical demands of video games, said when talking about nostalgia and the impacts it has on gamers when dealing with stress that, with nostalgia you get a sort of bonus relatedness because you get to connect to yourself. You're replaying a game from a positive childhood memory. Those things can be particularly powerful for short-term stress release. as well as saying, "In our research we found that people who have social nostalgic memories of playing games with friends in the past, they feel connected to themselves and their friends in the past, and they also feel connected in the present." There's no mention of playing games for nostalgic purposes within the Power of Play study, but there are stats on why people play, and the most common reason? Because it's fun. It's safe to assume that a large percentile of people experience nostalgia when they play games, especially given that the average age of a gamer in 2023 was 32, and had been playing games for an average of 21 years. The second favourite genre by percentage was arcade and other with 52%. So we have gamers that have been playing for over 2 decades, one of the favourite genres in arcade games, and as well as that, a lot of parent gamers love to play video games with their kids. To me, this is partial evidence that nostalgia plays a larger factor in video games, whether it's playing them for that feeling or playing through your kids as a vicarious way of reliving your own childhood. Sometimes we have to deal with stress. It might be a single day, it might be a week, it may be longer. It could be an entire situation that you're going through, and sometimes you just need reminding of a better time. It's easy to forget that things are going to be okay, that things will get better. Video games and consoles can help take you back to those simpler, potentially better days. Nick Bowman as well as Tim Wolf state in their Video Game Nostalgia and the Success of Retro Gaming article that video games can act as a time machine. And it's true. As mentioned before, I've started playing older games from my childhood simply for that remembrance of what it was like. It's fascinating to me that a game, no matter how bad it was, is spectacular when I was seeing it through the eyes of a child, just enjoying having a game to play. I remember playing Shadow the Hedgehog and thinking, holy shit, this is Sonic with guns, and it was the greatest thing in the world for a couple of weeks until I beat it. There was an unlimited amount of movie tie-in games and most of them were awful, but to list some off that I thought were good, we have Meet the Robinsons, despite the fact I've never saw the movie, Kung Fu Panda on the Nintendo Wii, which was great, Robots, I don't remember much of it, but one of my favourites was The Incredibles. My brother bought me it from Blockbuster. I must have played that game 100 times. Launching yourself around as a fat Mr. Incredible and fighting the giant robot bosses where they launch rocks at you, or the absolutely insane dash levels. I mean, it took me so long to beat the late for school mission, but I adored it. The entire reason I brought up the quote, video games as time machines, is because something else Nick and Tim bring up in their papers is that although technology is advancing at an incredible rate, and the improvements from video games when they started releasing to today is astronomical, and yet so many people try to replicate the design and feel of older games. Nostalgia is marketable, and companies know that now. In November 2016, Nintendo released the NES Classic Edition, with the greatest games preloaded into it, including Zelda, Mario, Donkey Kong, Kirby and so on. It sold out pretty quick, and after a couple of re-releases sold upwards of 5.28 million units worldwide. Sony then made a PS1 Classic in 2018 for its 24th year anniversary, albeit with not amazing success, mostly due to not having a lot of classic games. PlayStation also recently started doing extra tiers of their subscription service PS Plus, offering players the access to a myriad of PS1, 2 and 3 classics. Nintendo have started bringing back old games to the Switch as well, and gamers love them. They love going back to that old school feeling of gaming, with graphics that are nothing to shout home about, however with art styles to remember, gameplay to love, 8-bit music to admire, and memories to recreate. In the last decade, we have seen an influx in games being remastered or remade from the ground up. Recently, we've had the Resident Evil remakes coming out, which although are mostly the same games, have been remade to make them feel completely new. They remastered The Last of Us far more times than they needed to, let's be honest. It could have stopped after the PS4 remaster. Some games don't get a remaster or remake, but instead get upscaled with a HD version. For example, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger, Jak and Daxter, and so on. But despite reminiscing with remakes and masters, developers have tried to capture that beauty of older games. Signalis is described as a classic horror game, with an isometric view and pixelated graphics, and gameplay similar to that of Resident Evil with the puzzles, there's gunning down zombie-like creatures, and as well as that there's references to other well-known horror franchises scattered throughout, including a Silent Hill reference with the red screen save menus. Signalis still stands on its own 2 feet as a unique title and is well deserving of a playthrough if you 1. Enjoy horror games, or 2. Like the older game feel that it brings to the player. It was designed with nostalgia in mind, with the aesthetic of an older generation, and it achieves that greatly. It isn't always large companies or indie developers that try to bring in an audience to a nostalgic giving game. In the case of Bloodborne, a fan has been working on a demake, making it look and play as if it was on the PS1, and my god does it look great, and perfectly demonstrates how games like these would have worked had it been released 29 years ago. 29 years ago, and through those coming generations of consoles, games were made for one reason: money. But they were made to be fun, and even the bad ones were seen as great through the eyes of a child, but those eyes now were surrounded by the mind and responsibilities of an adult, and on stressful days or hard times, it's healthy and refreshing to pause that adult mind and open your younger eyes to view and play games that make you feel nostalgic. One of the upsides of replaying old games, besides the feelings of warmth, elation and reconnection to your childhood, is that you can deal with things that your younger self couldn't. As I said before, I would watch a loading screen for hours, purely because I thought Ratchet was actually travelling the entire galaxy to get to the next planet. But now as an adult you can figure things out. Now I could emulate the game and get past those missions, or could replay games that were maybe too hard at the time. Rayman 3, one of my favourite games as a kid. It was a joy skating around on rainbow rails and listening to some funky fun music, or collecting new abilities from cans and figuring out puzzles. But about halfway through the game, there is a boss fight with what I remember to be the big bad, Reflux. It's on a small arena, and for the life of me I could not figure out what to do, or I could and it was just too hard. I remember not playing the game for a while and instead playing other things. Eventually I would come back, beat it, and then eventually get stuck again on the final boss, which was the same guy just beefed up. I swear that boss was like an Elden Ring boss, but I'm sure if I went back and played now, I might not struggle as much. I'll say might, because if I go back with a lot of confidence and fail, it would be rather embarrassing. As I was writing this script and talking about these memories, a whole load more started flooding back to me, and one funny one in particular is when my friend who lived next door to me got Crash Bandicoot 3, and for some reason he just didn't have a memory card, and so we'd sit in his house and try and beat the entire game in one day. We would fail and start over the next and repeat it for weeks. Nostalgia is just pure joy. As mentioned, I was just thinking of one memory, and as I typed the words, more came to me. That's the joy of it. One thing can trigger a memory from the past which leads you down a rabbit hole of wonder and remembrance of a time. Nostalgia needs to be recognised as a reason for gaming. It's in no studies I found, yet so many people talk about it. It's only in recent years, with emulators, pirating and purchasing old consoles with old games, where the industry has started to understand that people want that retro feel, that feeling of being a kid again, and now we're starting to see the impact it has on people and the culture of gaming. Another quote from Nick Bowman that I really like is, "It's almost like a digital smoke break. Return to this past life, play through it, and reconnect with yourself." I would easily say that playing nostalgic games is a form of stress relief and therapy for me at least. I obviously can't speak for others, but I know when I load up a game and I hear I'm in for a time of relaxing, a time for me, a time where I don't need to worry about what's going on right now, even if it's just for an hour or so. Just like how I felt when I was a kid. It's the same eyes, different brain, but it's the same old games. I find comfort games strange. Not because I don't understand them, I do. I find comfort in games myself, but I don't have any comfort games, not even one. As a gamer, I'm riddled with the curse of the backlogs. I have loads of games to play, but no games to play. This can cause unnecessary stress when I come to play something and can't decide where I want to put my time. I normally end up just browsing up and down my library as if it's going to change, expecting to find something new. Like when you check the fridge over and over expecting a new snack to show up, and of course, it doesn't. I go through a cycle of checking my library, and then I'll look around the store page of whatever platform I'm on and just look at all the games that exist. I then give up and turn to TV or YouTube and waste my time there instead, still with the urge of wanting to play something, and yet if I did load up a game, it would be on for 5 minutes at most before I decide to switch it off. So that's why I find the idea of comfort in games a bit strange, because I don't have a single game that I can keep going back to knowing that the hour or more I put into it will give me any form of pleasure and a sense that I've recharged my battery before getting on with other responsibilities and life in general. I only recently found out that this is a somewhat common occurrence across players, and it's called gamer's block. It's exactly how it sounds. Someone wants to play games and they can't find the motivation or the enjoyment that games once brought them. I've experienced this multiple times, and yet at no point have I ever stuck to a single game that got me through those patches. This is where comfort games come in. They allow the player to slip back into something that they can familiarise themselves with and find that joy from. But why do we find comfort in games? Well, as covered in this Team Liquid article, there are 4 common factors that were found when people were asked about what makes a comfort game. The first of which is familiarity. For those with comfort games, it can be relaxing knowing that they know the game inside and out. There's no anxiety caused because they know what comes next and they know how to deal with it. And this can go for any genre really. It could be a sim where you're asked to complete mundane tasks over and over, like spraying a car in Power Wash Simulator. Maybe it's an action-adventure game like Uncharted and you know exactly how to get through a mission without breaking a sweat. Maybe it's a horror game and you've removed all the horror from it because you understand the mechanics. You know where the jump scares are and you know how to deal with the thing chasing you, like in Alien Isolation. Knowing what you're getting yourself in for is comforting. Sometimes games can be like going for an interview. You have a general idea of the type of questions they're going to ask of you and yet you don't know exactly. Once you have answered one question, you don't know what's expected of you next. It's like horror games, for example. You know the genre but you don't know exactly how it's going to scare you. You'll figure out one mechanic, but is that going to be the same throughout? An article from The Gamer titled Comfort Games, The Psychology Behind Nostalgic Gaming, Ryan Bamsey states, "Some will say that it's the very lack of surprise that makes these comforts so comfortable. When you know exactly what's coming next, you can experience a game rather passively. Passively experiencing a game sounds like when you put a movie on the side whilst you try to study or work. It's a small distraction that subconsciously causes your work to feel a little less mandatory and helps you to ease into it and be productive without putting all your attention and focus onto something that you don't particularly want to. Why would you want to passively experience a game? Shouldn't you want to be on the edge of your seat, encapsulated and having time fly by without ever taking your eyes off the game? Well, no. Not all of the time. This is why comfort is loved. Sometimes you don't have the time or the energy to pour that amount of dedication into something. Instead, you want to play something to switch your brain off and capture that sense of productivity whilst actually doing very little in the real world. With a lack of energy, you may want to play something where you're not required to put a lot of focus into it. We've all had times where we've sat and done nothing in a game. We've definitely all drove around in GTA acting like a normal citizen, abiding traffic laws and taking the city in as we drive around it. Games where it does not ask the player for a set standard of focus, like a multiplayer FPS for example, and instead gives the player that freedom of what they want to do and will allow the player to give 2%, 10% or 100% effort and focus and still feel like they're doing something, is why games like Animal Crossing, Stardew and even more action-based games like Breath of the Wild are some of the most common comfort games for players. In the Team Liquid article, their employees' favourite comfort games were Minecraft, Stardew, Animal Crossing, and closely followed by Breath of the Wild and Pokemon. There's a range there from sandboxes to Sims, open world adventures to catch them all games. The correlation between them all is the minimum effort you need to put into each to get some enjoyment out of them. If you decided you wanted to free roam a world in Minecraft, you can. If you want to explore and talk to NPCs in Stardew or Animal Crossing, you can. Want to ride your horse and just explore Hyrule? Go for it. There's no limit to how much or how little effort these games require from you. This links in with the next factor, versatility. The members that took part in the survey also gave versatility as a reason for a game being a comfort. What they meant by this was the games give them the ability to put in a lot of effort and do something which may be more challenging, or be more AFK and relaxed and do something more mindlessly. An example given was old school RuneScape. One person said, "You can go through and do the endgame raids or just relax and do some mindless fishing." This and focus is why competitive games aren't often comfort games, because you must be good at this one style of playing and for the sake of winning, you must focus. When I think of versatility in games, I also think of RPGs that allow you to change your build to be incredibly overpowered should you wish to be so. Baldur's Gate 3 for example has an incredible amount of options for the player to choose from. You can be a barbarian and throw people around, or you can choose a magic based build to pick people off from a distance. You can formulate a build centered around you, making it easier or harder depending on what you want. The last factor that played a part in the survey was music, and the nostalgia it can bring to some, and for others the calm that certain melodies can cause. It's almost stereotypical to associate comfort games with cartoony, cute art styles, relaxing themes, and a mix of fun mini-games and mundane tasks, but overall music was a more prominent factor and more comforting for those who took part in the survey. Music is definitely an aspect of a game that I find comforting. Minecraft for me is a game where the music always makes me feel good. I don't play it often because, like many, I just go through 2-week phases, then there's the 6-month hiatus. There's something so soothing, calming and comforting about the music of Minecraft to me. It may not be for everyone, and you may find the same feelings I do, just in other soundtracks. It may be linked with nostalgia, as I used to play Minecraft a lot when I was young, and at the time it was maybe even a comfort game for me, but I might have grown out of the gameplay, but not the music. It's that alone that comforts me. C418's Araya Math, what you're hearing now, is one of the songs I could listen to for hours and not get sick of. It reminds me of times just flying around in creative mode, building things and experimenting with redstone, just good times as a kid that even to this day makes me grin. Another game where the music is comforting is Hollow Knight. Granted, not all the time, considering this game has some of the best, most hype music in any game I've ever played, but one area in particular gives me the feeling of comfort, and if you've played you probably know exactly what I'm about to say. The City of Tears. Its atmospheric palette combined with the vocals of Amelia are just something else. The music complements the area's design and vice versa. The tranquil blue of the environment mixed with the endless rain is so relaxing. I'm not a summer person. I much prefer the winter, and my favourite weather are thunderstorms. When I found the bench where you sit with Quirrell, against the windows you watch the barrage of rain fall and the soothing voice of Amelia is heard in the background, it quickly became the most comforting moment in any game. It's just such a perfect moment for me. I'm a simple man. Give me a game, give me a window, give me a thunderstorm and I'm happy. Give me my dogs, put them on a lead, stick me in a field and turn the weather cycle to rain and I'm happy. I find a lot of relaxation when sat near a window watching the rain fall and hearing it bounce off the glass and the surrounding rooftops. It depresses some, but for me it's tranquility. Take that and translate that feeling into a game and you get Hollow Knight in the City of Tears. Other games may have different moments where you may have felt something similar. One that I've very recently experienced was in Celeste. As I was jumping, dashing and struggling my way up the mountain, I came across Theo. He set up a small campfire and it's a moment of relief as you know you don't need to try and make another jump. You can just sit and have a heart-to-heart with an NPC. Having that small break before getting back to filing down my joystick and sweating profusely was comforting because that little refresher was enough time to acknowledge the challenge that I had just overcome. Granted, it was only a few levels of climbing and wasn't the hardest thing ever, but still it was a challenge. You aren't rewarded with much for completing the area other than progressing with the game, but you are rewarded with this checkpoint that allows you to breathe and relax, which on contrast to what was happening 10 minutes prior was a great feeling. This is where I find my comfort in games, in moments where I sometimes wouldn't have expected to. In the roguelike Hades, you fight your way out of hell over and over again with the help of the gods at your side. Well, besides Hades. As you fight your way through levels, you can come across rooms where you meet Charon. These rooms offer possible aids in your raid to escape the underworld. There's no fighting and no focus necessary, you can just take your time. There's similar rooms to these where you can meet NPCs like Sisyphus who you can stop and have a wholesome chat with, but by far my favourite version of these rooms is in Asphodel with Eurydice. You enter the room and immediately hear her calm singing voice. It's the complete opposite of everything else outside the room. The chaos of trying to survive enemies whilst also trying to decide what build you want to go with and if your run seems good or not is all washed away with her songs. As someone who has had gamer's block on multiple occasions, I've come to learn that personally it's finding that comfort within discomfort, peace within chaos and success after failure. I struggle with failure, especially in games. I have the personality trait of needing to prevail against a challenge. I can't let it beat me. Elden Ring's first tree sentinel is not intended for the player to beat straight away. It's an introduction to its open world and tells the player, you're weak, go explore, come back later when you are leveled to beat this guy, but no, I fought it. I died so many times and yet I could not let myself leave and see another inch of its world without knowing that I had beat that boss. So that's what I did and that's what I do. I throw myself at it until I'm good enough to beat it. Only then will I explore the rest of the game. Completing these tasks that aren't mandatory of me is where I find comfort, knowing I learned, adapted and overcame. It's a chronic pain in the ass knowing that I can leave and do something else, either on the game or on another, but I just can't bring myself to do it. I physically fight with my brain and my hands and the one more try mentality takes control whilst I just scream internally, but when it's completed the feeling of relief is worth it. Hollow Knight's benches are inspired by the bonfires of Dark Souls, a series known for making people complain about difficulty and how challenging it can be, but the bonfires across the series are some of the most comforting things for me. Much like how in Celeste I came across a moment of peace and managed to take a moment of respite, The Dark Souls bonfires come as a checkpoint between some of the most difficult levels and bosses in all of game design. How does an infamously difficult franchise make me feel comfort from the feeling of succeeding? If you've enjoyed the games before, you've most likely been stuck on an area or a boss, and after multiple attempts of throwing yourself at it over and over again, you keep failing. In Dark Souls it's mostly linear, so you either overcome what you're being presented with or you fail. You might decide to farm souls and level up, you could try changing your build. If it's a boss, you might start paying a bit more attention to the moveset and look for micro tells of certain attacks, or keep your eye open for when to counter. After finally getting through a tough area, you can see your goal in the distance. A bonfire, a place of safety. Nothing is going to hurt you there. You don't need to be on guard checking around every corner for hidden enemies. You can just sit and celebrate that you have done it. You have achieved what you aim to do. It's this feeling that has taught so many players that overcoming a challenge is not impossible, including in real life. I won't go into it too much as there's countless videos on how Dark Souls has helped people, but Souls games have been a comfort for people at their lowest. I mean their lowest. Multiple stories of people fighting back against the hollowing in their mind and overcoming the suicidal tendencies they felt. Life is a struggle and we must go on. Unfortunately, at times people don't feel that way. The challenge a boss can present is overshadowed by the challenge of getting out of bed for some. That feeling of finally learning a boss and completely ruining them, but most importantly knowing you did it, is motivation. That accomplishment may seem small, but it teaches the player it's possible. How many times have we been met with a boss and on our first attempt we got our arse handed to us and died quicker than Sir Gideon and said, "This is impossible, I'm never getting this." Yes it is, and yes you are. You're going to fucking do this. I don't care how, but you will, and when you do beat it, the elation is like nothing else. That feeling of knowing it's possible, hell it wasn't, but you made it possible. That feeling knowing you can overcome anything. The Souls series can help a player learn that it's okay to struggle. It's okay to be beaten down repeatedly, but it's about walking back through that fog, not letting the fog cloud your mind, going toe to toe with the challenges head on and aiming to prevail. Whether you are beaten or you are victorious, you're met with the same thing, a bonfire. Look to it. The last challenge you faced was rewarded with a bonfire. The next will be too. Every time you achieve something, you take a step closer to the end, and every victory you're reminded of with the coiled sword burning endlessly in the flames. You have done it already, you just have to keep taking that extra step. You made it past yesterday's challenge, today's may seem impossible, but tomorrow is anew. And if you feel like giving up, don't you dare go hollow. Keep pushing, keep climbing, keep fighting, because on the other side is a bonfire waiting for you. Picture this. John comes home from his 9 to 5. He's alone and is currently very stressed out due to unpaid bills. Work is getting on top of him. He has chores that need attending. His laundry needs done, otherwise he won't have any clothes for the rest of the week. He hasn't eaten anything proper in days and has lost any appetite that he may have had. He comes in, he neglects the chores and moves straight to his desk. No, John is not a Discord mod. John is simply looking to escape from his real world problems and escape into a game. The same game he's played every night after work. Too much of anything is bad for us. Self-suppressive escapism is when someone goes beyond finding enjoyment from a game, beyond looking for a pick-me-up and beyond healthy. Addiction occurs when someone goes from choosing to play a game for their benefit to becoming dependent on it. The reasons for becoming dependent will differentiate between people. As established in the previous segments of this series, nostalgia and comfort can both play a part in why a person plays games. Pair those motivations with a withered mindset of someone who's maybe going through a tough time, dealing with stress and possibly some mental health, and you get why people become locked into a routine and find themselves spending hours that sum up to days in games without looking after themselves in the real world. This is where escapism becomes addiction. Let's take it back for a moment. How does one get to the point of becoming addicted to video games? Well, for a multitude of reasons, but allow me to break it down. In a paper published in 2023, titled Escaping Through Virtual Gaming, the following reasons were discussed as a motivation for playing games. Stress relief, the challenge of games, social interaction, escapism, achievements, and competition. Let's remove escapism from the list, and what are we left with? What remains is all valid reasons to game, and as mentioned in the previous segment, nostalgia and comfort can both play a part in relieving stress. Socially, you can turn to friends online and forget about time and have it fly by. Someone write that down, that was fire. If your social battery is low or you're just naturally an introverted person, finding conversations and enjoyment out of playing in the virtual world with friends might be easier for you than actually meeting up with and doing things with friends in the real world. Besides from stress and social reasons to play, there's the challenge of games, which links in with achievement. When our personal lives aren't going great and it feels like not much is being achieved or that everything is going wrong, one thing after another, it can be that sense of completion and achievement that drag a player into a game's world. Picking up a game and completing a portion of it, whether it's a level, earning a trophy, finally unlocking that item that you wanted, and so on. Those small goals help to make the player feel like they've earned it. It's a good thing, which in comparison to the repeated losses in their actual lives could lead to a hobby of gaming becoming an escape. Escapism isn't all bad. It's been seen in a negative light for years, however in its truest form it's simply a mental diversion from our problems and sometimes the more unpleasant aspects that life naturally brings. When you were a kid, you most likely played with toys. I know I did. I used to set up my bedroom with a mix between Transformer toys and Legos, and for hours I would breathe life into them, having them battle against each other or work together to take down the one big bad. This is impossible to do without imagination, and even though it may not have seemed like it at the time, I was escaping into a fictional world where I wasn't the main character. I was simply the narrator and director. The characters of the stories I would create were the ones dealing with problems. Whether it was a giant gap between my bed and drawers that they needed to figure out how to cross, or how the hell they were going to take down the army of evil guys that trump them 10 to 1. I was putting problems onto them and making them solve it. It didn't feel like me, but it was an escape. Now, fast forward like 10 years and I don't use toys and my imagination, but I do use video games to escape. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is a difference between running away from problems and taking a mental break for your own good. Taking a break from stress prevents further stress. It allows the anxiety that's pent up to slowly dissipate without you realising, and once it's gone, it's a relief. Escaping into a virtual world comes with a myriad of positive side effects, however, it's when it steps over the line of a break from stress and into something that becomes a pattern of causing more stress, numbing it, and then repeating it, that it becomes a problem. What I mean by this is with the example I have at the start with John. He comes back from work, which is stressing him out due to it getting on top of him. His chores and personal life are then taking the back seat because he's too stressed to do anything about them, which is another stressor. He takes the games to forget about them, but once that session is done and he switches the game off for the night, what happens? Does John feel relief and ready to take on tomorrow? Absolutely not. He feels worse because what he should have done is act. He's just pushed his stress down further and it's ready to surface again when he opens his eyes to the sound of his alarm clock telling him to go deal with the issues he has in the following morning. He's running from his problems by getting that dopamine hit from the games he plays. They make him feel better for the several hours he's there, makes him forget who he is, and instead of achieving in the real world and prioritising the things that could reduce his stress, he decided to waste away whilst his main character in his game takes on the problems and solves them for him. This is the other side of the line where escapism becomes a problem and, if not kept in check, could lead down a path of addiction and potentially depression. See, escapism breaks down into two forms: suppression or expansion of oneself. Which one you are comes down to why you choose to escape. This psychological study discussed the two forms and how they break down, stating that self-suppression is closely related with self-alienating yourself and attempting to forget your own problems. Another article defines both forms of escapism as the following. Self-suppression escapism derives from the motivation to avoid negative evaluation of self by getting focused on an activity. Self-expansion is motivated from facilitations of positive experiences by getting immersed in an activity. Self-expansion on paper is the healthy, more positively looked at side of escapism. This is when you turn to games to be immersed in their worlds and it has a positive outcome, whether it be that it makes the player happy and afterwards they feel as though they've done something with their time and they don't get that post-nut clarity of gaming. Self-suppression is the opposite. It's playing games for the sake of it and to remove yourself from your problems and into a world where they don't exist. Its motivation is to make you forget about how you're feeling by immersing you elsewhere, a self-defense mechanism. Nostalgia could be one of the reasons for a person to choose a game over another hobby to escape into. After all, nostalgia is a beautiful, comforting pain. The ideology of these expressions of escapism derives from and is closely related to the two forms of motivation, them being promotion focused and prevention focused. Promotion caution being a person who seeks to achieve a goal for a positive outcome, often having higher standards and seeking a gain from the activity that they are doing. Prevention-focused individuals are more likely to see tasks as an obligation and seek to complete it, seeing failure as something that they want to avoid at all costs. To relate this back to gaming, these focuses can be applied to how we see and approach challenges within games. Daryl Talks Games has an amazing video on it, so I highly recommend checking it out after this video. I'll link it in the description. To sum up, prevention-focused individuals are more likely to quit if they're unable to complete a challenge in a game, because they wish to seek a positive outcome, that being happiness or achieving something, so they're more likely to go find that in another game, whereas prevention-focused folk are more likely to see a challenge as a mandatory task. They will home in and lock onto that challenge until they either beat it or they quit the game for good. They are less focused on seeking the positive outcome of enjoyment and more motivated on not failing the task at hand. When I spoke about fighting the tree sentinel non-stop in the comfort segment, this is explained by me being a prevention focused person when it comes down to challenges in video games. The effects of escapism can become detrimental. Of course, it could lead to an addiction where the only place a person feels comfort is in their alternate virtual world, as well as a loss of time and an overall lower quality of life. A study on self-suppressive escapism and those who use games as that escape found that the majority relied on the unorthodox coping method to reduce their self-awareness because of unpleasant emotions, thoughts, events from their life, or the state of who they were as a person. There's a mental health condition known as dissociation. It's not always something to be diagnosed with, but can be a fleeting feeling that comes and goes with anxiety. It's often brought on when someone is becoming overstimulated with negative emotions. It's a feeling of detachment from your physical form, and almost as if you're watching yourself in the third person perspective. It's a way for your brain to protect you from the feelings you're having, and can often lead to someone becoming emotionless altogether in that situation. The responses from those in the study suggest that using escapism as a therapy was their way of forcing themselves to disconnect and become dissociated. A similar study into pathological gambling conceived similar results, stating that gambling led to escapism and dissociation from unpleasant emotions. Despite knowing that gambling would not resolve their problems, they persisted in their behaviour, using the feeling of dissociation as the main reason for it. Those affected by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, are more likely to rely on video games as an escape from their problems. This is due to ADHD already causing an increase in impulsive behaviour, and generally creates more addictive personalities. But it's not all bad. A study into ADHD and gaming was conducted in 2023, and it found a plethora of positive links associated between gaming and it, including the ability to focus much greater on a task, that then led to improvements in attributes like multitasking. Games give the players instant feedback, which rewards the overactive mind of someone with ADHD, which in turn led to them being more focused and reduced stress. Despite everything, escapism can be exactly what some people need. Those who have unfortunately been diagnosed with terminal illnesses are literally living their last days and know it, counting down until eventually they reach zero. It's a dire situation that no one deserves to go through, and yet cruelly some do. In spite of this, there have been some incredible stories to come out where those affected found a comfort and escape in video games. Mr. Alex Hay took to Reddit on March 8th of last year following the announcement of one of his most anticipated games, Starfield, would be delayed. He mentions in his post that he was looking forward to using the game as a distraction since he had recently stopped his lung cancer treatment and was being put onto palliative care. His Xbox was a form of escapism for him, taking him and placing him in infinite worlds with endless possibilities. Less than a month later, a comment would be made, announcing the passing of Alex. It was expressed how much he loved Bethesda games, and in his last month spent hours upon hours playing and 100%ing games like Elden Ring, Hogwarts Legacy, and put over 1,000 hours into RimWorld. Devs that worked on Starfield caught onto the post and actually left a tribute to him within Starfield. Other examples of similar stories include Gabe Marcello, who, after finding the strength to attend PAX Prime despite his heart condition, was disappointed when Breath of the Wild wasn't there for him to play. He seen PAX as his one chance to play the game before he would inevitably pass. His mother contacted Nintendo and they managed to set it up so that Gabe would get a chance to play the newest game in his favourite gaming franchise. His mother said he was in that game what he was not in life. This was due to his condition, rendering him from doing things that we take for granted like running. Following this story, a father would reach out to Rockstar and explain that his son Jurian had a rare disease that caused tumours to grow along his nervous system and would have loved the chance to play Red Dead Redemption 2, but due to his illness, may never get to. Once again, Rocksteady provided Jurian with a demo and gave them a way of escaping to a world without pain. In conclusion to this, it's important to remember why you play video games. Do you play them just for fun, social reasons, or to relieve stress? Whatever reason you do, just remember that it may seem to help in the short term, but it isn't going to resolve your problems retaining in your personal life. I agree that they can help one's state of mind and even help them through tough times, but using them to escape and forget about who you are and neglecting that person altogether is a dark path that nobody should walk. The quantity of how much you consume and the reason for it determines whether it's healthy or not. Even medicine, if consumed too much, becomes a poison. So, escape. Escape into a world where you are the main character and you are in control. Escape and become powerful, master skills and take on challenges you dare to in the real world. Escape to a pastime, escape from stress, but remember to escape escapism. Allow their worlds to be a therapy and remember the power of nostalgia, comfort and escapism in video games.